2500 BC, Britain entered the Bronze Age. It's one of the most mysterious periods of our ancient past. And most mysterious of all are the strange rituals, death rites and beliefs from this distant time. Now, some bizarre recent finds are changing our understanding of the Bronze Age. Holes drilled into human bone, magical objects buried with the dead.
There'd be stone persons, tree persons, sky persons. Spirits are literally everywhere.
Recently, archaeologists have even found mummified remains right here in Britain.
It seemed like a crazy idea that there could possibly be mummification in prehistoric Britain.
And now a spectacular dig on a long-forgotten burial ground promises to reveal much more. This is it, Low Hauxley in Northumberland. Back in the Bronze Age, it was completely surrounded by water, and our ancestors used it as an enormous burial ground. This whole slope could have bodies in it, but one more storm and the whole thing could be washed away. So archaeologists are racing against time to try and excavate it before it's too late. In a remote corner of the northeast, one of the most important digs of the year is getting underway. It's Low Hauxley in Northumberland. This is a remarkable site, thought to have been a burial ground dating from the early Bronze Age around 4,500 years ago. At this time in history, the pyramids were being built in Egypt, while here in Britain, a new way of life was taking shape. The Bronze Age saw our ancestors put down roots, creating permanent settlements and parcelling up the land into fields. These people were farmers and traders living in what seems to have been something of a golden age, a time of plentiful natural resources for all. But it's also a time from which very little hard evidence survives, making sites like Low Hauxley crucial. What secrets does this site hold about our ancestors' beliefs in life and death and the world to come? The only way to find out is by digging. Today's day one of the dig, and excavators are arriving on site to strip back the sand. Over thousands of years, large dunes have built up over the burials. The plan's straightforward, to dig one huge trench right across the burial mound and back inland.
I reckon there's about another 2 metres from there, so I think it's going to have to go down about 3 metres in this corner.
Site director Clive Waddington is in charge of the excavation, and already there's good news. His mechanical diggers have quickly revealed the top of a Bronze Age cairn, the large mound of stones that would once have marked out the location of our burial ground.
Just looking at the cairn, and you can see now that the highest stone is actually here. When I originally saw it in the cliff face, it was only about 1 metre deep, and now it looks like it's at least 1.5 metres high. So, you know, the cairn's taller than we anticipated, which is quite interesting.
It's a very promising beginning. And over the next 2 weeks, the team remove several hundred tons of sand and reveal much more of the cairn. There's only a limited window in which to complete this dig, as the severe winter storms which batter coastal Britain could sweep away the entire site. So the pressure's on to get down to work. Once the dunes are fully cleared and the sand held back behind tarpaulins, it's time to get digging by hand. Time Team's Phil Hardings come to Low Hauxley to help out.
You can see that we're taking the last bit of sand off, and it's exposing a lot more archaeology than we thought was here.
Have you got any finds?
We've got a superb one that's just come up. How about that?
Oh, wow.
It is a wonderfully preserved whetstone.
That is splendid. And it's almost like it almost got a handle to it,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I think you can even see the wear where someone's held it. and then use that to sharpen a blade.
But I mean, is this the sort of thing you'd expect to find on a Bronze Age burial mound?
Yeah, they do turn up on Bronze Age burials, certainly in this part of the world. The idea of sharpening blades would have been very important to them, and you can imbue the blade with power, perhaps even to kill. So basically, these whetstones could be considered magical objects that help them as they go on their journey into the spirit world.
So it's highly probable then that many, many years ago, this whetstone was symbolically placed into the grave with the departed for the afterlife.
I think it could be, yes.
The whetstone is an important indicator of the arrival of metal in Britain. When it first appeared on our shores, people must have seen bronze as a magical substance in its own right. So it's not surprising that an object so closely linked to it should have become important to the rituals of death. But our whetstone is only one of an extraordinary range of objects that turn up in Bronze Age graves. Finds from the northeast include ornate pottery, sometimes with residues of hallucinogenic drugs thought to form part of death rituals. Valuable metal objects like this bronze dagger blade. And the ultimate in Bronze Age bling, gold jewellery. So finding grave goods on the Low Hawksley dig is exactly the start we've been hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, if you cast your eye down here, you can see this.
Phil Harding's now keen to get the bigger picture of the site, so he's joining Clive for an aerial survey. They're hoping to see evidence of why Bronze Age people might have been here in the first place.
You can see that there's half of it on the land, which is the bit that you're excavating, and the other bit, the other half is gone. It's a perfect sort of half a circle, isn't it?
It is, it's incredibly well preserved. You can see that black peat in the cliff line.
Oh, yeah.
That represents an old marsh, and there was originally a freshwater stream that ran around the back of our site, and that would have surrounded it by water, so it meant it would have been a little island.
So really here you've got everything you want. You've got that isolated spot where you put your ancestors, you've got fresh water, you've got good arable land, you've got a good place to live.
It's superb. And also, of course, don't forget the North Sea itself. That was a magnificent superhighway. You know, you could get out in your boats, you could easily travel north, south, or even further east over to the continent.
From the air, it's easy to see how in 2500 BC, the site would have formed a prominent hillock on the coastline. Prehistoric people often seem to have been attracted to places like this on the edge of land and water. There may well have been a settlement here near the burial ground. But was the appeal of this type of location essentially religious? I'm hoping to find the answer at a very well-known spiritual centre just a few miles from the dig, the holy island of Lindisfarne. In the early Christian era, pilgrims and holy people were drawn here. It's a magical spot, completely cut off twice a day by the tides, a place half land and half water. Archaeologists call these boundary sites liminal places, places on the edge of this world and the next.
You are on the very edge of the world that we all inhabit, and that means that you're on the edge also of the next world, the world of the ancestors, the world of God. And that was what attracted people to places like Lindisfarne. And it wasn't just the early Christians. I mean, there is abundant evidence that prehistoric people, going back to the Bronze Age at least, and even earlier, actually liked these liminal places. They used to have rituals and rites near water. You know, these things go back a very long way, thousands of years. And I think that the Christians are really plugging into an earlier tradition.
So Low Hawksley too may well have been a magical liminal place back in the Bronze Age, a place suitable for the strange rites our ancestors practiced. The geography certainly fits, and Clive's now made another find that does hint at ritual activity.
What you got here then?
I've got a big cup and ring marked rock.
Oh yeah. You got one there, and one there.
That's right, and there's a connecting duct. going between them, and you can still see the peck marks.
So effectively what they're doing is taking a hammer or something like that and pecking a cut mark shape in the side of the rock.
That's right, and we think this is happening way back in the early Neolithic.
This Neolithic or late Stone Age rock has been deliberately carved. It's an example of prehistoric rock art. It was already ancient when our burial ground was built, and it seems to have once been part of a much larger panel. So why did the people of Low Hawksley break it apart and place a fragment in their cemetery? Clive thinks he may have the explanation, but to really make sense of it, he needs to take Phil deep into the Northumberland moors.
Oh, trigger.
This is going to be proper. This is proper off-roading.
Big old rut this side again. Oh!
We're okay.
We're through.
Clive's something of an authority on Northumbrian rock art, and he excavated this particular site a few years back. It's remarkable that these early artworks aren't in museums, but are still lying close to the places where people first shaped and used them thousands of years ago.
Here we go.
That is incredible.
This is one of these fabulous rock art panels, of which there are over 1,000 in Northumberland.
And each of these little sort of dimples in the rock have been pecked by hand.
That's right, yeah. Although we can't be sure exactly what they mean, we can speculate with a little bit of confidence, and we're fairly sure now that they are, if you like, expressions of people's beliefs about the world. And so at least at a kind of intuitive level, we get a glimpse, if you like, into the mind and the thought process of prehistoric people.
It's stunning. It's like an open-air art gallery.
These 6,000-year-old carvings are, in fact, among the oldest works of art in Britain. Clive's explored and photographed many of the best examples across the region.
I mean, it must have taken hours and hours of patient pecking to actually form these patterns. But why do they do it?
Well, we have to bear in mind that the landscape would have been very different than it is today. So we would have been in a wooded landscape with lots of deciduous woodland. But this rock panel you can see here would have been exposed. So this would have created a clearing, and that would have allowed the sunlight in, which would have allowed grass to grow and plants and so on. And that would have attracted animals. And where you get animals, of course, people follow. People will then hunt them and take the animals.
So they're symbols of life, of propagation of food and encouraging animals in.
That's right, yeah. But curiously, by the time we get to the Bronze Age, they're quite clearly redefining the importance or the significance, if you like, of these places. Because what they do is break through these carvings and then reincorporate them in their monuments to the dead. So in the Bronze Age, what they're deliberately doing is drawing on the ancient power of these symbols, and they're associating them with the journey into the afterlife.
So for the Bronze Age people who built Low Hawksley, these older rocks may have retained some sort of supernatural charge. Burying fragments of them with their dead somehow drew on this power. So we know that Bronze Age people were interested in the Stone Age or Neolithic era that preceded them, but their beliefs and practices didn't emerge unchanged from earlier stages of prehistory. To understand this earlier Neolithic world, we need to travel back to the most important and magical ancient landscape in all of Britain.
Thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon.
This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world. Enjoy front row seats for the greatest show on Earth and under it.
It's week 3 on one of the year's biggest and most important archaeological digs, Low Hawksley in Northumbria. In this remote corner of the northeast, excavation is underway on a Bronze Age burial ground, an island of the dead. In this period, grave sites give us some of the best evidence about the lives and rituals of the people who used the burial ground over 4,000 years ago.
Hello, Clive.
Oh, there, Phil.
God, this is coming along in a bit, isn't it? I mean, the last time I was here, you just had this pile of stones, this sort of burial cairn. But now, you've You've got a burial cairn with structure.
Yeah, I mean, you can see we've got these two wonderfully preserved curbs coming out. So here's the edge of the cairn, the outer edge, and then this one behind me that runs all the way down here.
Of course, it goes on all the way round.
Well, you can see it tracing all the way around here, continues, starts to curve, and it's still going. So it looks like this is defining this central high area.
Any finds?
Yeah, we've just got some beaker pottery.
Ah,
and here it is.
Beaker pottery I count as good finds. Wow, that is a very thin piece of pot with some gorgeous incised decoration on it.
Yeah, that's fingernail impressions making a herringbone pattern.
And then these, wow, that could be the same pot. So you've literally got two beakers.
This new style of pottery appears across Britain in the early Bronze Age. No one knows whether it was brought here by a new group of immigrants, the beaker people, or whether Britain's existing inhabitants just started to make different kinds of objects. Either way, it's vital evidence of the rise of an important new culture in Bronze Age Britain. Complex trading networks built up between the first permanent villages. But there's not a lot of physical evidence from this exciting period, and next to nothing in terms of large structures. To find those, you need to go back to the period that came just before the Bronze Age, the late Stone Age or Neolithic. Neolithic people built vast monuments in stone, ritual structures scattered across the country, most famously, of course, Stonehenge. But there's one place in Britain where you can still see an entire Neolithic landscape that's remained almost unchanged. Orkney.
Look at these, aren't they fantastic? This is called the Ring of Brodgar, and people used to think that stone circles like these, where presumably ancient rituals were held, were the most important structures on prehistoric Orkney. But we now know they're just the tip of a prehistoric iceberg.
Just a few miles from the Ring of Brodgar, on a thin spit of land separating two lochs, archaeologists have made a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. A gigantic group of stone-built structures, the like of which have never been seen before. They're on a scale that nobody ever expected to find in Neolithic Britain. The remains date from the same time that ancient Troy was being founded and Minoan civilization was taking root in Crete. This site could be as important as Knossos. The man in charge of this groundbreaking dig is archaeologist Nick Card.
If someone says Neolithic archaeology to me, I tend to think of a couple of stone tools, a standing stone maybe a ring of stones. What I certainly don't think of is this. Look at it, it's absolutely incredible. It's a great network of buildings, beautiful stonework, and it all comes from the New Stone Age. Amazing. How did you find this?
Well, it started back in 2003 when this field was last ploughed and this large stone slab turned up, which was considered to be part of a Bronze Age kiss. But instead of finding a kiss, what was uncovered was the corner of one of these amazing buildings. And that kind of got the alarm bells ringing. And over the next few seasons, we opened a series of test pits right the way across the mound. And in every single one, we discovered the remains of structural archaeology. But never in our wildest dreams could we have thought that this was just a Neolithic complex. It's about 250 metres long, about 100 metres wide. It's huge.
The archaeologists are now 7 years into their excavation of this very special site. And they're still honing their ideas about exactly what it may formerly have been.
This isn't somewhere where people necessarily would have lived.
I don't think so. I think what you're looking at, it's not a domestic site. I think that the site was probably only used at particular times of year, maybe for large community gatherings.
It is a temple, isn't it?
It has to be, Tony. It has to be a temple. I can't think what else it is.
I mean, the masonry is so fine. You know, this isn't just a house. This has got more in common with somewhere like Canterbury Cathedral.
How do you feel about it, seeing it for the first time?
I'm completely wiped out. I am absolutely gobsmacked. I never thought I could witness Neolithic architecture on this sort of scale.
The building at the heart of this complex, Structure 10, is now thought to be the focus of the temple site. This Stone Age structure would have dominated the landscape. 4-metre-thick stone walls contain an inner chamber. Internally, it's a relatively small space, only big enough for a few people. So it seems this temple was primarily intended to be seen from the outside. It was meant to impress and would have been visible from miles around.
Basically, the Neolithic is, if you think of it as a pioneering phase. People are occupying, putting their mark on the landscape. And this extraordinary temple is about getting people here, because it must have required a lot of people to build it. They're making a mark in the landscape, but they're coming together. So the building of the building is, in a way, its use as well.
Orkney's 5,000-year-old Stone Age temple is only the beginning. It now appears that the temple is part of a much wider, more complex ritual landscape. It's aligned with some of the other significant monuments on Orkney, and it's even been suggested they form a processional way along which devotees would have moved. It sits midway between the Ring of Brodgar and the Stones of Stennis. At the far end of this route, there's another monument, one that offers important clues to the prehistoric world of the dead. The ancient burial mound of Maes Howe. On the outside, it's a large grassy mound surrounded by a bank and ditch. But to understand what this profoundly magical place is really all about, you have to venture inside. The low, narrow, stone-lined passageway is made from massive single stone slabs up to 10 metres long. It's a serious feat of ancient engineering.
Really have to stoop down to get through, and then bang, you open up into this central chamber. Wow. Well, it's certainly a very impressive place, isn't it?
And it sounds like a church.
It does a bit, doesn't it?
And we're quite certain that would have been deliberate. You know, that's why the walls are so smooth.
In the same way that you'd build a theatre or a cinema.
Yeah, or indeed a church.
Yeah.
It's so carefully, so beautifully constructed. I just look at that and think, I can't believe that that's sort of 3000 BC. You know, that's 500 years before the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
Once again, the skill with which this place was constructed reveals the sophistication of our Neolithic ancestors. It's so precisely engineered that for a few days a year around the winter solstice, something amazing happens here. The setting solstice sun beams directly along the entrance passage right into the tomb, flooding it with a golden glow. So if Maes Howe has a function, it's perhaps to link the cycles of life and death to the seasons and the wider universe. It is, of course, primarily a place to leave the dead, a tomb. But it's utterly unlike a tomb as we'd understand it today.
You've got these 3 side chambers.
Yeah.
And they would probably have been for individual families.
And do you think that they would have put them in and sealed it up and gone away again, rather like we do nowadays?
Well, that used to be the way people thought. But they have actually excavated a number of side chambers in other tombs. And what they found was a complete surprise. The bodies weren't left there intact, but it would appear that people came back and sort of took them out. And occasionally they took them out and then they got a bit muddled up. So one chap's arm would get muddled up with a lady's leg or something.
Why might they have done that?
Well, it does seem that these tombs are all about ancestors. And the ancestors, they lived in here in death. And when you took them out of here into the community, you were, if you like, bringing them to life for a brief period. And then you would have talked about the ancestors and reminisced, and all of that's holding the community together. But you've got to remember, this is at a sort of early stage in Britain's history, a pioneering stage, when, you know, there was a huge landscape out there, and communities had to be held together. And this was the glue that held communities together.
We'll probably never find early Bronze Age structures on the scale seen in Neolithic Orkney, which may be good evidence that the Bronze Age was a critical turning point in our history. And today, other kinds of evidence, including vital burial evidence, are giving us new insights. Including, for the first time in Britain, proof that our Bronze Age ancestors were mummifying their dead.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen. Join over 10,000 Patreon members worldwide and see new digs take place and amazing additional extras.
Cranbourne Chase, Dorset. Another part of Britain that's bristling with prehistoric monuments.
So what sort of things do you get?
Burial mounds, ceremonial features, henges.
Local farmer Martin Green has been involved in several excavations in the area. But when he began to dig a previously untouched field on the edge of his land, he made a startling discovery that's changing our understanding of the Bronze Age dead.
So, Martin, how did you discover the site?
Well, initially I spotted it as a very clear soil mark when this field was ploughed back in '72.
Did you then go back and do geophysics or something like that?
Much later we did. I got Bournemouth University involved and they did a geophysics survey.
Where exactly was it here?
It was just here. It was only about 15 metres in diameter, but of course the mound had long ago been ploughed flat.
What Martin had stumbled on was a Bronze Age burial mound with intact burials. The skeletons were arranged in the familiar Bronze Age crouched positions, but there was something strange and shocking about these particular remains.
What condition were the bones in?
The bones were in very good condition, and from an early phase of excavation we could see there were some rather unusual traits about them.
Unusual? In what sense unusual? I mean, were they the sort of things you'd expected from bodies being gnawed by rats or something like that?
No, much more bizarre than that. It happened to the bodies prior to them being placed in the graves.
At Bournemouth University, bone experts have been carefully scrutinising these remains, trying to understand their significance. It's taken many months of painstaking work to arrive at a mind-boggling realisation. Martin Smith is the osteoarchaeologist in charge.
If I show that to you there, Francis, we can see something rather odd there.
That's extraordinary. If I'd been looking at a piece of wood with a hole in it like that from a Bronze Age site, you know, I'd said it's been drilled. But I mean, that's in bone. I've never seen that before.
But what is even more interesting is there's another one.
And it looks like the same size hole,
yeah,
too.
Absolutely. We've measured them, and they actually are the same size. They're coming up at about 9 millimetres. And then if we look at the other leg, this is the tibia, and we've got the same sort of thing going on again there.
When Martin examined the smaller, harder bones under the microscope, he found correspondingly smaller holes. No one had ever seen anything like this in prehistoric skeletons. So what could possibly have caused the holes?
I mean, the obvious thought is that this is some Bronze Age surgeon doing miracle surgery, But you're going to say no, aren't you?
I am going to say no. Firstly, if that's the case, well, the patient died during surgery because we've got no evidence of healing, we've got no bony reaction going on, but also some of these areas, like this area inside the hip joint is a very, very solid, very strong joint. You'd have to wrench that person's hip apart in order to do this, and there seems no reason to do it. And the same thing at the knee as well. So it certainly, this is not some sort of disease process. It's not some sort of post-burial process that's going on in the ground. It's nothing natural.
What do you think's going on?
Well, we're wondering if they're hanging on to their dead for a long time. They're perhaps sort of binding them up at the time that they've died, sitting in a sort of crouched position. But sooner or later, if you hang on to a body like that for long enough, it's going to start to fall apart. So we think perhaps what they're doing is they're making a little hole that you can actually insert something into, perhaps some sort of peg or dowel that they're using to join these crumbling skeletons together. And that's why we haven't got the pegs. They could have used bone pegs, but they would have survived, and we haven't got them. So we think that this may have been wood and it's decomposed. And that would explain why the holes are on their joints. We think that's what they're doing with their ancestors. They're literally keeping their ancestors together.
So there's a clue that the weird Stone Age habit of keeping dead ancestors hanging around does seem to have been continued into the Bronze Age. But even if ancestors were sometimes kept on hand, the Bronze Age also saw the rise of single burials in burial grounds that we would find familiar today. And this is indeed what we're finding at Low Hawksley.
Last time I was here, I was down on that beach, and I was looking up at this cliff, and I could see that there was some evidence of a kist. Presumably this is it now.
Yeah, what we've got here is part of a disturbed kist, and we've got this part of it surviving. There's been a bit of bone come out from another kist that was also disturbed just behind Kate there.
When you talk about a kist, what actually is it?
It's basically a stone-lined grave. So what they've done, they've cut a pit out and then they've lined it with these sandstone slabs, with one on the base, one round each side, and then usually with a big capstone that sits on top, and that effectively creates a tomb. They put the body in, usually in a fetal position, so in a sense they're going back into the ground in the position in which they came into life.
Kist burials like this became more and more common as we moved into the Bronze Age, so it's no surprise to see them turning up on our site.
What were the bones that you found, Kate?
Well, we found the remains of what we think are 3 long bones. They're really degraded, so you can see in the tray here, this is what we got out.
This is one of them, yeah?
Yep, so I think probably what they are is the remains of an arm, so a humerus and a radius and an ulna. But they're really degraded, so any work that we do with them we'll have to do back in the lab.
Kist burials are the beginning of a recognisably modern form of burial. Kists are essentially stone coffins. This type of burial became very common as the Bronze Age went on. But there'd been no clean break with the older, stranger rituals. The Cranbourne Chase burials aren't alone in providing evidence of strange Bronze Age behaviour involving the dead. Mike Parker Pearson is one of the foremost experts on Bronze Age Britain. A few years ago, on an incredible dig on the remote Scottish island of South Uist, Mike became the first archaeologist to uncover British mummies.
Mike, when I heard that you'd got mummies here, I thought I was going to see things that were all wrapped up with little shrivelled faces. Why do you say these are mummies? They look like any other skeleton to me that you could excavate from anywhere.
Well, you're quite right. I mean, they are skeletons. But it was discovering that if we looked a little more carefully, there was a bigger story here.
What was it that you saw that made you think they were so odd?
Well, the first thing was the chemical alterations in the skeleton. When a body decays, it actually alters the structure inside the bone itself, the millions of little blood vessels. And what we could see through scientific analysis of the bones was that decay process had started but then been halted. And we think what was done to them was that they were immersed in a preserving environment. A peat bog is the most obvious solution.
These Iron Age bog bodies show how effective bogs are at preserving human flesh. But these later bodies weren't deliberately preserved. and there seems to have been no plan to remove them from their resting places. Whereas Mike's Bronze Age mummies have been deliberately preserved. They must have been carefully lowered into a bog by their relatives and left pickling for many months. The process works thanks to the humic or bog acid that's released as peat rots. It's this chemical that saturates body tissue and helps to preserve it. The South Uist mummies had most of their flesh removed before entering the bog. What was important here was preserving the cartilage that holds the skeletons together. It's this preservation that makes them mummified.
Of course, we tend to think of mummification as something very exotic, don't we? Something that happened in the Near East while we were being far more sensible. So to be confronted by mummies here, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yes, it's been a big shock. I was totally shocked when I realised what we had, because it seemed like a crazy idea that there could possibly be mummification in prehistoric Britain.
It does imply, doesn't it, that the living were actually using the dead in a way which is pretty alien to us.
Yes, I think it's really showing that once you're dead in Bronze Age society, you're not necessarily stuck in the ground straight away. That could just be the beginning of a rather surprising and eventful journey, both for the body as well as the soul. And after they're dead, they still have a presence among the living.
So it seems these Bronze Age mummies were kept around for special ritual occasions, a magical and direct connection to the world of the dead.
It's almost like looking history in the face.
Yeah.
This is the personification of the past. And so I think that these would have had importance not just as conduits from the other world, but also as the visible representation of ancestry and the rules and the laws of the ancestors.
What was going on in the world of these people when all this was happening?
Well, we're actually seeing one of the most profound economic changes in Britain. Farming had already been around in Britain for 2,500 years. But what happens in the middle of the Bronze Age is a change to a much more sedentary, fixed lifestyle. It's the laying out of hedges, ditches, creating fields, and with that, of course, come new rights to land.
So they're thinking about ownership.
Yes, this is people saying, this is our land, this is your land. And of course, to do that, you may just have to explain why it is your land, and what better than to actually have the proof in the form of the ancestors themselves who worked that very land.
And not just one ancestor. If there's a load of them all glued together, this is the Joneses sort of thing.
Yeah, and it may just be that we're also seeing amalgamation of different plots, different zones. By bringing the people together, you're actually combining lineages possibly into one big lineage which has property rights that are more extensive than before.
So just like back in the Stone Age, dead ancestors continued to play a vital role, or several roles, in the lives of the living. It's an idea reinforced by Sheffield University's mummification study, which has now found evidence of mummification right across Bronze Age Britain.
By careful excavation, we're beginning to see that things that look articulate and our whole bodies are actually parts of many bodies. And this again is very challenging to us because we've tended to think about the body as a whole, as an individual whole. And increasingly, even bodies that look like individual wholes are actually re-articulated, brought together from many bodies. And what does this suggest? It's something quite remarkable in terms of attitudes to the individual, to the person as a whole, because actually what we're saying is that people are parts of many people.
But just because we know what they did with their human remains, it doesn't mean we know what our ancestors believed about life, death and the world beyond. Yet some prehistorians think that there is a way to better understand their spiritual beliefs, a way to see inside the Bronze Age mind. I've been exploring the strange world of the Bronze Age dead. Recent archaeology has made great progress in revealing how prehistoric people treated their dead and of unveiling the strange displays they made with their remains. And the Low Hawksley dig has given us a fantastic opportunity to study an undisturbed burial ground and cairn structure.
Evidence of the extraordinary structures our ancestors built for the dead has survived for thousands of years, and even today we're discovering more. But it's not just the physical remains, the structures and the skeletons. We're beginning to grasp a little bit of how they felt about their world, what they believed in. For them, life and death ran closely together. They weren't distinct and separate like they are for us today. And the forces and cycles of the natural world held an awesome significance for them.
But it's still a struggle to know how Bronze Age people understood their world and the world beyond. There is one fascinating approach: studying societies around the world at similar levels of technological development. There's one belief system that crops up in nearly all early societies: shamanism. Shamans are part priest, part witch doctor, and back in prehistory, they held the keys to other worlds.
What is it that you think that the shaman tells us about the kind of society that they had in the Bronze Age?
People didn't draw a hard and fast distinction between the ordinary day-to-day world and that other world which we reserve for Sundays, you know, of the ancestors and the spirits and of worship and religion. The shamans were communicating with the afterlife and a number of other different spiritual worlds to make changes happen in the day-to-day world. So let's say you grazed your livestock on your neighbour's land. Your neighbour was furious. Your neighbour would invoke his ancestral spirits to zap you, and you went to a shaman to fend off those ancestral spirits.
You've been talking about spirits. Who were the spirits?
Within a shamanic worldview, things are considered alive. So things that we would consider just inert resource, like a stone. Within a shamanic worldview, that stone could be viewed as alive, as having consciousness, perhaps similar to us as humans. You know, there'd be stone persons, tree persons, sky persons.
So in a way, the whole world was sort of shimmering with life in a way that we just don't experience nowadays.
Exactly.
Shamanic rituals almost always involve wild dance and music, even the consumption of alcohol or hallucinogenic drugs.
What is it, do you think, that the shamans were actually doing?
I think the main thing was they were trying to get into a trance state, and when they got to this trance state through drumming and chanting, then they can actually communicate with the spirits. The shaman harnesses the spirits through powerful objects. So if he has shells, then they're harnessing the power of the sea. Then they'll wear feathers, so they're harnessing the power of the sky. It's quite scary when you see it happening, because the shaman doesn't actually look like a normal person anymore. They've actually physically transformed themselves.
We'll never know for certain whether any strange shamanic rituals took place at Low Hawksley, but it's highly likely given the site's importance as a burial ground. With the dig now starting to wrap up, Clive's bringing all the small finds back to his laboratory for post-excavation analysis. Most importantly, the human bone.
Around here now, you've been able to gather together all the burials from that one cairn. This one is pretty complete. What can you actually tell us about it?
Well, this individual is about 12 to 16 years old, so it's a fairly young person. But because they're young, the bones aren't sufficiently well formed to be diagnostic of whether they are a male or a female. We don't know the cause of death. We've not been able to establish that, although there is some interesting pathologies. So you can see, for example, this quite serious abscess on the lower jaw there. And of course that means that they either had quite a sweet diet or they didn't clean the teeth properly.
So, I mean, you've got this one, and I think there were other complete skeletons from the site.
That's right. There's at least 4 inhumations that have come out, so fully fleshed people, and we've also had 4 cremations as well. So there's a minimum of 8 people underneath that cairn, but we think there's been quite a few others who've been washed away by the sea.
So we know exactly where the burials were within the Low Hawksley burial ground, and even the number of people buried there. And with the Bronze Age dig drawing to a close, we can pull together everything we've learnt about this site.
It's been a long and arduous dig here at Low Hawksley, 10 weeks altogether, nearly come to the end. And Clive, you're still standing.
Just about.
Do you enjoy it?
It's been fantastic, absolutely wonderful.
So have you got a relatively clear picture now of how this place would have looked in the Bronze Age?
I think so, yeah. I mean, you can see we're on the top of this low hilltop. This would have graded down either side to a wetland and to a marsh. Beyond that, we can imagine a system of sand dunes, and beyond that, the sea. But of course, it would be more prominent still because the Bronze Age cairn would have been situated on the top of here, and it would have been a really quite substantial monument. And below that, we would have had at least 8 burials. It's a monument that grew over time as well, so it got bigger and bigger as time went on.
With Clive's analysis, we can create a clear picture of our burial ground and cairn, and even of the nature of the wider landscape in which it sat. The large central cairn stood in a marshy landscape with a primary burial at the heart of the site. In total, at least 8 burials were located around the mound. As the cairn above was built up by successive generations, it became ever more prominent in the landscape, an important and visible reminder of the world of the ancestors.
Phil, you've been helping on the dig. How's it gone for you?
It's been a real pleasure and, in a way, a sort of privilege to have been part of the excavation of this Bronze Age cairn, which really has added a hell of a lot to our understanding of Bronze Age practice, burial practice in the northeast. And the nice thing about it is that satisfaction that we've saved it from the sea. I mean, it looks pretty benign now, but with a few other winter storms in a few months, it will go.
Just a month after the dig finished, Britain was battered by some of the worst winter storms in living memory. If it hadn't been excavated, Low Hawksley would have vanished without trace. It's one of countless archaeological sites around our coast that are threatened by the encroaching sea. We're just lucky that we had the opportunity and time to record and preserve the secrets of Low Hawksley.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.